Here we go. And Judith Fridiani, wife of Jack Mendelson, is lighting our blazing finale. Read again. And we begin with words of Jack Mendelson read by Noah.
Here in this sanctuary of ancient dreams and wisdom and beauty, we come to grow, to be healed, to stretch mind and heart, to be challenged, renewed, to be helped in our own continuing struggles for meaning and love, to help build a world with more justice and mercy in it, to be counted among the hopers and doers. In the face of cynicism, darkness, brutality all around us and within, we seek to align ourselves with a living community that would affirm rather than despair, that would think and act rather than simply adjust and succumb. Here, we invite the spirit of our own humanity and the healing powers under, around, through, and beyond it, to give us the nerve and grace, the toughness and sensitivity to search out the truth that frees and the life that maketh all things new.
And there is only one hymn that can be sung after that reading, and that is, O Life That Maketh All Things New. It is number 12 in our hymnal. join in the words of our unison affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So may it be. Good morning. Welcome. Welcome, everyone. Welcome. If you are here for the very first time, welcome. If you have been here forever, and as someone once said, welcome if you're here for the very last time. It is good to be together. There are blue connection cards in the pews to stay in touch with what goes on here, and if you are new, you may wish to visit our welcome table on the way into Community Hour. There are a variety of announcements this morning. There is a film that our Peace and Justice group is showing at noon, The Man Who Saved the World. No small task that, and that is at noon in room 202. And I might point out that both Annie and Jennifer are away today. Today is the day of Annie's father-in-law's memorial service in Maine, and Jen is in Chicago at the Meadville Lombard Theological School. She periodically has to be on site there as part of her ministerial studies. Today is our annual Spirit of Democracy service, and this is a service that honors the legacy of our late Minister Emeritus, Jack Mendelson. There is so much to say about Jack. When Jack was alive, he used to hate this Sunday because I would have a long-winded introduction of Jack, and he said it felt very much like his memorial service that he was attending. So I'm going to be briefer today, but Jack was a liberal lion, one of the most, perhaps the most significant Unitarian Universalist minister of the 20th century. He served churches in Boston and Indianapolis and Rockford and, yes indeed, Bedford, Massachusetts. Jack was a social activist, and he played a leading role in the civil rights movements of the 1960s and 1970s. He played a leading role in raising the visibility and participation of women in our religious movement. Jack was, and I wrote these words down, Jack was respected, he was irascible, Jack was loving, and Jack was beloved. His social activism imprinted on the DNA of Unitarian Universalist churches. Certainly, our churches were known for activism of a sort going way back to the beginnings. But since Jack Mendelson, you cannot have a Unitarian Universalist church in East Overshoe No Place land without their having a social justice committee and seeing social justice as part of the integral mission of a Unitarian Universalist congregation. And so we honor his legacy today. And thank you, Judith, for lighting our flaming chalice today. I'll have more to say in a bit about our guest speaker, who is Julian Diego Lopez-Leyva. He is the organizer, the lead organizer of the Boston March for Our Lives that took place last March. And in a moment, I'll have some more to say with Julian. But there will be a discussion after the service from 11:30 to noon upstairs in the Bacon Room overlooking the Common if you'd like to carry on a conversation with Julian. And after that, I particularly invite youth and young people who want to hang out some more with Julian to stay on up there, and we've got some pizza and other stuff to tide you over. So consider staying around for further conversation with him. I also am pointing out that, yes, indeed, our membership book is yet again available, and I put out an appeal for new members, and to my shock and surprise, there was a small tsunami of new members, or a small wave at least. And if you'd like to catch that wave, this book is available for your signature after the service, and of course if you've got questions about any of that as well. Let's see. Why don't Julian, you and I, talk to people?
Thank you.
You're welcome. This is Julian, and I should say that I first met Julian last May when there was a Poor People's Campaign demonstration on the Boston Common, and both Julian and I were speaking at that demonstration, and it was after that demonstration that I was yet again arrested sitting in at the governor's office. I think you missed that opportunity.
I remember seeing it from afar. It was,
right.
It was a truly heroic act.
Right, well, all I had to do was sit down. So I think you know that February 17th of last year, there was the massacre in Parkland, Florida at the Marjorie Stoneham Douglas High School. 17 people were murdered. And it was in reaction to that that Julian and many people across the country organized the March for Our Lives, and there was a major march in Washington, D.C., and there were nearly 1,000 sibling marches that happened across the country and brought nearly 2 million people out, making that one of the largest political protests in our history. And so, Julian, I thought that before the younger kids go off to their classes, I simply wanted to ask you, what were the roots of your becoming an activist? Julian, I should say, is a student at Bunker Hill Community College, and he's aiming toward a career in law. But what were the roots of your activism?
I started at a very strange place at a very strange time. I was born in Phoenix, Arizona in 1998. And so my coming of age had a lot to do with what was going on around that area. Maricopa County, SB 1070 was proposed, I recall, by a very famous Sheriff, Joe Arpaio. And I remember some of my earliest memories were being about this tall, in front of the City Hall and in front of the State House in Arizona, protesting SB 1070 with my family, because what it effectively had allowed to do was a lot of racial profiling, the likes of stop and frisk with New York City, and that reminded me that was always, that was just, I felt like that was my roots in trying to effectuate change, and that unfortunately had never ever ceased. Fortunately and unfortunately, particularly because I found a lot of my family was involved in a lot of incidents, including gun violence. And since I was a young kid, this has always been a part of my life and a part of my family's life, the burden that we've had to deal with, particularly when it came to gun violence. And I remember coming in right after the day of that Parkland shooting and being almost heartbroken, because this has happened to so many of us. I'm sure so many people in the congregation today as well. And I found so much concern and so much upset that I went out, to recall, in Evansway Park, right by Fenway, right where my school was, and tried to get students involved and tried to tell them, you know, this should not be happening. We should not have to live in a world like this, our country, where this kind of happens all the time. And gratefully, we were able to do that, and we were able to organize. A lot of the people who I worked with then, I work with today, in accessing and operating March for Our Lives Boston, now March for Our Lives Massachusetts. It's been an incredible privilege to do that.
I think you can tell that it would be an understatement to say that I was impressed by Julian. Again, before the younger kids go, I know that there are some young people from Bedford here as well who participated in the walkout last March. And I just want to ask one or two of you if you can just say a word about what that was like here in Bedford.
Hi, I'm Lily. I'm a junior at Bedford High School. So when me and my friend Hannah saw the Parkland shooting, of course we were horrified. And at least for me, especially when I saw students coming out and organizing walkouts, that really inspired me, and it made me think like this is something I can actually do to stop something that is happening way too often. So I went to the principal and asked her if I could do something like a walkout, and she said she couldn't get involved, but Hannah and now a freshman in college, Helen Plizzi, she said that they had also reached out to her and wanted to do something, so she put us together and we started planning the walkout.
Hi, I'm Hannah O'Connor. I'm also a junior at Bedford High School. And as Lily said, I think Mrs. Galante facilitated me meeting up with Helen and Lily and sharing the same feelings and interest in responding with a walkout. So in the weeks that led up to the planned national day for the walkout, we were just planning, collaborating, talking with other students, just trying to facilitate everything that we could. And then as it happened on March 17th, there was a snow day at our school, and an email was sent out through our principal, and it was saying that unfortunately we could not have the walkout the next day after a snow day had happened, and it didn't feel right to do that. And so we, tried to understand and respect that point of view, but nonetheless we knew that at the root of this, it needed to happen, and the day wasn't so much the focus, just that it was happening, and we were honoring these people, but also not just prayers and thoughts, taking action. So we sent out a school-wide email, and the next day people congregated together in the lobby, and we had speeches, and people actually did go outside, even though we were told that was not acceptable to do. So that's sort of how that happened. Yeah.
Give it up in appreciation for all that they're doing. Okay, teachers and littler kids are going to go off to their classes, and as they do, we are singing Spirit of Life.
That's good for me.
That's good.
Appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Now, Abby is going to read some words of Jane Addams. And if you don't know Jane Addams, she was 19th century and early 20th century activist, feminist, community organizer. She was an inspiration to Jack Mendelson, and indeed Jack chose this quotation as the mission statement for our Spirit of Democracy service. So, Abby, let's hear it.
To attain individual morality in an age that demands social morality, to pride oneself on the result of personal effort when the time demands social adjustment, is utterly to fail to apprehend the situation. We are learning that a standard of social ethics is not attained by traveling a sequestered byway, but by mixing on the thronged and common road where all must turn for one another and at least see the size of one another's burdens. To follow the path of social morality results perforce in the temper, if not the practice, of the democratic spirit, for it implies that diversified human experience and resultant sympathy, which are the foundation and guarantee of democracy.
Thank you, Abby. We'll distribute those words because they really are quite profound. They started by saying to think of things in personal terms when really the problems are systemic is to utterly misunderstand the situation, and that for all of us, the very least that we must do is to see the size of one another's burdens. That is one of the things for which we gather here. Freely we have received, freely give. For the good works of this congregation within and far, far beyond these walls, our offering will now gratefully be received. I am very pleased to welcome Julian to our pulpit this Spirit of Democracy Sunday. In this bleak, dispiriting, soul-pummeling time, one of the brightest hopes is the rise of youth leadership for social justice, and I'm so appreciative of youth participation in this service as well. I'll read one paragraph from the mission statement of the March for Our Lives movement. Not one more. We cannot allow one more person to be killed by senseless gun violence. We cannot allow one more person to experience the pain of losing a loved one. We cannot allow one more family to wait for a call or text that never comes. We cannot allow the normalization of gun violence to continue. We must create a safe and compassionate nation for our youth to grow up in. Julian describes himself as a raging humanist. Jack Mendelson would love that. Raging humanist. Intercollegiate as well, and proud Chicano. He lives with his grandmother in JP, and please welcome Julian Lopez-Leyva.
Good morning, sisters and brothers. Reverend Gibbons, good morning, congregation of First Parish Bedford. It is again January, the youngest month, and today, we, the people of this nation and this world, have grown somewhat restless in the positions we hold. In this age of internet, of high-speed economic transformation, populism has taken the world stage as we struggle to transcend the condition as the tired, trying, transfixed witnesses to such a delicate moment in history. We recognize in our world today an international awakening, great masses of women and men stretching, striving, reaching towards some measure of divine change, change we duly need. And in delving deeper through the lens before us today, we see too that we are soon to arrive on a year since the tragedy at Stoneman Douglas High School shook the spirits of a nation. All over again, our neighbors, our strangers, ourselves just as well as mothers, fathers, sisters, and brothers, we're acquainted with those far too familiar, heart-wrenching, breaking news scenes of yet another mass shooting. A nation watching, helicopters flying overhead, teenagers rushing out, heads bowed in lines. The cruisers, the stretchers, the sirens, the ambulances. Empty appeals for thoughts and prayers all over again. But from that tragedy-stricken South Florida suburb emerged faithful faces of youthful, stone-like messianic bravery, emancipated bravery, unafraid defenders of a notion, a philosophy so foundational it is cradled in the womb of every blood-pumping, life-giving mortal heart in this world. And in words revised to mold to the crises of a new generation, they insisted not one more. This is the universal impulse to live and to love that reads ubiquitous in the volumes of our human history. It is generation in and generation out, demanding different words and different languages throughout. You shall not strike me of my due time on this earth. So only downstream, the civil rights generation, the anti-war generation, many of whom I'm certain have taken part in this here. Our generation comes and continues in this questioning. Where did we lose this mutual understanding to life? Was it even ever there? I organized March for Our Lives Boston, coming from a lifetime of sweat, tears, and agony, asking these same questions, losing a cousin in Phoenix from senseless gun violence. I have another cousin too who has lost an entire half of his body because he cannot, and this was more recent, and I speak very candidly about this. Because not unlike many others in this world, as well as I'm certain many of you in the audience, I too have lost the blessed flesh of family and friends, only some among countless kin whose skin was broken by the cold lead pellets summoned of a finger, a gun, and a possessed head. And so somehow this fundamental notion seems lost, and lost long before we were birthed so strangely on this earth. Sullied instead in the hearts of too many by an existential anger, a rage so expansive it encapsulates even the innocent other, the woman at the theater, the man in prayer, the bright young student. But as decent and sensible, peace-loving Americans. We cannot overlook the very many silent wars that play out all across our land, across urban environments as well as rural environments as well as suburban environments, the mute massacres which each and every day reap young lives in ravages community across this country, littering inner cities, heartbreaking children, adults, and the like. But I'm given slight solace in the fact that it is January, the supposed youngest month of the year. So where we have seen such atrocity in the past, we always have the mentality to move forward and to push beyond this, going into a future. It is no secret that the institution of the congregation for what I speak to now has held as the foundation of the civil rights movement in the previous century. We worship here in Bedford, but not very far from where they set example. Martin Luther King himself first received his PhD in Boston University's School of Theology and delivered sermons as a minister in Roxbury's historic 12th Baptist Church. Just as much as this, we should reflect that the fact that the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, which enlightened and raised like fire the civil rights movement, was founded at a moment not so dissimilar to our own today. The litigation that followed the Montgomery bus boycotts ruled in Browner v. Gale that segregation of public buses was unconstitutional, but the forces of civil rights justice knew very well that they remained to reach many more victories ahead on their path. So we stand today where Turnout to March for Our Lives proves to be one of the largest in American history, bringing beyond it a number of federal and state legal victories for gun safety, including Internal Attorney General Healey's defense of Massachusetts' assault weapons ban. But with a simple glimpse at the headlines, we would make a fatal mistake in assuming this amounts to all the change we demanded. We have promises to keep, and months and months and miles to go before we sleep. And we will not sleep until we resolve the issue, the crisis of American gun violence in this nation. And so maybe it would be hypocritical to heap praise on the institution of the church and congregation when I have, frankly, willfully deserted my Catholic roots without so much as looking back. But it cannot be denied that where there is a congregation, there is a community. I point this out because it appears to me that the community is the missing link today in our democratic process. And it will become increasingly missed if we careen towards an age of rampant distrust, heightened by a skewed impulse towards profiteering individualism and the ironic sense of isolation the internet and social media may bring. But I posit that community can be maintained just as fervently and with just as much force in a non-theistic mind frame as well as a theistic one. A group can hold reservation of a god or gods and still maintain a mutual belief system. I replaced much of my Catholic upbringing with the tenets of humanism, which basically says that the value is derived of man and not of someplace far above him. In speaking about community and of congregation, I wanted so much to talk about many of the people that I had met the last time I came here, which was only a few weeks ago. I wanted to recognize one man in your congregation, Noah, who was aiming to be a nurse in a nation confronted today in a drought of nurses, aspiring to heal wounds in a country and world whose children have been hurt by far too many. I wanted to thank him. And alongside him, a woman in the congregation, Miss Lori Van Loon, whose concern with our country's immigration crisis has moved her to join a twosome program and confront the issues directly with knowledge and sensibility on the subject of immigration. I wanted to thank her as well. And just alongside them, a man in your congregation as well, Mr. Donald Marshall, who has independently organized Bedford's first gun buyback program, which very well may have saved countless of lives. I wanted to thank him. I take it to mind these three examples, as well as the countless other brilliant and dedicated individuals in this congregation who I've yet to meet. And I've been given the opportunity to come out here and say, very frankly, that I've come to one conclusion. I do have gratitude for you, Reverend Gibbons. Thank you so much for inviting me out here to speak your spirits of democracy. But with all due respect, I believe you are sorely mistaken. I do not exemplify the spirit of democracy in any shape or form. Instead, sisters and brothers, here at First Parish, I believe I am staring right back at it. Thank you.
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Tell me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Our closing hymn is We'll Build a Land. It was written by the same person that wrote Spirit of Life, Carolyn McDade, and Carolyn was one of Jack's parishioners at the Arlington Street Church in Boston. We'll sing We'll Build a Land. It's number 121. closing words were written by the Reverend Mark Morrison Reed, who was a kid in one of the congregations that Jack served, the First Unitarian Church in Chicago. These are Mark's words. The central task of the religious community is to unveil the bonds that bind each to all. There is a connectedness, a relationship discovered amid the particulars of our own lives and the lives of others. Once felt, it inspires us to act for justice. It is the church that assures us that we are not struggling for justice on our own, but as members of a large community. The religious community is essential, for alone our vision is too narrow to see all that must be seen, and our strength too limited to do all that must be done. Together, our vision widens and our strength is renewed. May we be renewed. Amen and amen.